My parents lied about my brother's death. I found him alive 20 years later. I always grew up knowing that I had a brother, or at least, that I was supposed to have had one. His name was Daniel. My parents told me he died before I was old enough to remember him. And so my childhood was filled with stories about this invisible ghost sibling who had once existed but left no trace. Whenever I asked questions, my parents kept their answers short. He was sick, they'd say. It was a tragedy, but you don't need to worry about it. My mom would sometimes tear up if I pressed further. So I learned early that it was a subject better left untouched. But kids are curious, and I wasn't any different. I used to wonder why there weren't any photos of him. My parents had whole albums of me, baby pictures, first day of kindergarten, birthdays. But when it came to Daniel, there was nothing. Not a single framed picture in the house. I remember asking once, when I was maybe 8 or 9, why there weren't any baby pictures of him. My dad froze, visibly uncomfortable, and then muttered something about it being too painful for my mom to keep them around. That answer sat strangely in my head. Even at that age, I thought, if I died, wouldn't my parents want to hold on to the memories? Wouldn't they keep at least one picture? It wasn't the only odd thing. Occasionally, when extended family visited, I'd hear whispers. My aunt once started to say something about Daniel, but my mom shot her a look so sharp that she went silent immediately. I couldn't catch the words, but the tension in the room was palpable. It was as if everyone had agreed on some rule. Don't talk about Daniel. By the time I was a teenager, the story didn't sit right with me. I knew plenty of kids who had lost siblings. Their families didn't erase their existence. They had photos, keepsakes, gravestones to visit. In my family, it was as if Daniel had never lived at all. One day, in high school, I brought it up again. I asked my mom how old Daniel was when he died. She froze at the kitchen counter, her back to me. For a long moment, I thought she wouldn't answer. Then she said softly, too. That was it. Just one word. No elaboration, no detail. I felt like I'd stepped into a minefield just by asking. And yet, the older I got, the more the inconsistencies piled up. If he had been 2, then I should have been old enough to have some memory of him. Even just a flash. But my brain was completely blank. I didn't remember him at all. Not his voice. Not his face. Not even the vaguest feeling of another child being in the house. It was as if he had never existed. When I was 17, something happened that stuck with me for years. My grandmother, my dad's mom, was over for dinner. She was a small, frail woman who didn't talk much. But that night she had a glass of wine more than usual. At some point, she looked at me across the table and said, "You know, you should meet your brother someday. He'd be proud of you." The entire room froze. My mother's face went pale. My dad's jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might crack. Then, in a tone that was sharp and cutting, my dad snapped, "Mom, enough." My grandmother blinked, confused, like she'd slipped and said something she wasn't supposed to. The rest of dinner was painfully quiet. Afterward, I tried to bring it up to my parents, but they shut me down instantly. My dad yelled at me for digging into things that don't matter, and my mom stormed off in tears. But the damage was done. For the first time, someone had openly said something that didn't align with the story I'd been told all my life. My brother wasn't dead, or at least, not in the way I'd been told. When I left for college, I tried to put the mystery behind me. It felt like a locked box I'd never be allowed to open. And truthfully, college gave me enough to focus on. New friends, exams, internships. My world was busy enough that I stopped obsessing over Daniel. But the thought never really went away. It was like an itch in the back of my mind, a puzzle piece that refused to fit. Whenever I came home for holidays, I'd look around the house with fresh eyes, wondering if there were hidden clues. Nothing. My parents had cleaned the slate so thoroughly, it was as if Daniel had never lived there. Until the summer after my sophomore year, I was home for a few weeks, helping my parents clean out the attic. They were planning to remodel, and most of the junk up there hadn't been touched in decades. It was dusty, hot, and miserable work, but I didn't mind. Part of me secretly hoped I'd find something about Daniel. A photo, a toy, a birth certificate, anything. And then I did. At the bottom of an old box filled with tax documents and random papers, I found an envelope. It was yellowed with age, sealed, and had my mother's handwriting on the front. It simply read, "Daniel." My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were hospital records. Not death records, but discharge papers. They showed that Daniel had been born healthy. There were vaccination records, pediatric notes, even a copy of his social security card. My breath caught in my throat. None of it suggested death. In fact, the records continued until he was at least 4 years old. Not 2. I sat there on the attic floor, reading those papers over and over, my heart pounding in my chest. The story I had been fed all my life was unraveling. Why would my parents lie about his age? Why would they say he died if there were records of him living years longer? And where the hell was he now? I wanted to storm downstairs and demand answers immediately, but some instinct told me to hold back. If they had lied this deeply, confronting them without more proof might make them bury the truth even further. So instead, I carefully tucked the envelope into my backpack and said nothing. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. My world felt unsteady, like the floor had been ripped out from under me. I thought about my grandmother's slip, about the silence, about the missing photos. Daniel wasn't dead, at least, not when they said he was, and I was going to find out the truth. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had found in the attic. For the rest of that summer, the envelope never left my backpack. I carried it around like a secret weapon, a truth no one else knew I had uncovered. Every time I looked at my parents, I saw them differently. Their smiles felt forced, their words suspicious. I replayed every childhood memory, trying to find cracks in the story, and I kept circling back to one question. Why would they lie? About a week later, I decided to test the waters. My mom was making dinner, humming softly to herself, when I casually asked, "Hey, what was Daniel like before he got sick?" Her hands froze over the cutting board. For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then, without turning to face me, she said, "He was sweet, quiet. You would have liked him." That was all. Nothing about his favorite toy, or what he looked like, or how old he was. Just vague words that left me more frustrated than before. So I pushed, "Do you have any pictures of him?" That did it. Her shoulders tensed. She slammed the knife down harder than necessary and snapped, "Why are you bringing this up again? We've talked about this. It's too painful." I wanted to scream that I knew the truth, that I had proof she was lying. But something in her voice, that sharpness, mixed with fear, told me to hold back. Not yet. Instead, I started my own quiet investigation. First stop was the county clerk's office. If Daniel had really been born, there had to be a birth certificate. Sure enough, after a nervous half-hour wait, the woman behind the desk handed me a copy. Daniel James Carter, born 2 years before me. Healthy, alive. Then I asked about death records. She searched, frowned, and shook her head. Nothing under that name in this county. My pulse quickened. No death certificate. At least, not here. I thanked her and left, my hands trembling as I clutched the papers. Daniel had lived longer than they told me, and there was no official record of his death. Back home, I started snooping more aggressively. Whenever my parents left the house, I went through old drawers, boxes, anything that might hold a clue. One afternoon, I hit pay dirt, hidden in the bottom of my dad's locked filing cabinet, which I managed to open with a bobby pin after an embarrassing 30 minutes of fumbling. I found a stack of letters. They were from a lawyer, custody papers, social worker notes, dates that lined up with when Daniel would have been 4 or 5. The words "ward of the state" jumped out at me, along with termination of parental rights. I stared at the documents, my stomach churning. My parents hadn't buried a child. They'd lost custody of one. And then, almost as if fate wanted to twist the knife deeper, I found a single faded Polaroid tucked into the stack. A little boy, maybe 3 or 4 years old, standing in a backyard I didn't recognize. He had dark hair, a crooked grin, and something about his eyes. They looked exactly like mine. I couldn't breathe. For the first time, Daniel was real to me. Not a ghost, not a forbidden subject, but a person. My brother. That night, I couldn't hold back anymore. I waited until after dinner, when we were sitting in the living room, and I dropped the Polaroid onto the coffee table. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice trembling. My parents froze. My mom's hand flew to her mouth. My dad's face drained of color. I pressed harder. "This is Daniel, isn't it? You told me he died. You've been lying to me my whole life." Silence, just the sound of the clock ticking on the wall. Finally, my dad muttered, "You shouldn't have found that." Rage boiled inside me. Shouldn't have found it. He's my brother. What the hell happened to him? Where is he? My mom started sobbing, shaking her head violently. My dad snapped at me to drop it, his voice louder and angrier than I'd ever heard. He said I didn't understand, that it was for the best, but he never said the words I needed to hear. He never said yes, he died. He never gave me closure. Instead, they stonewalled me, refusing to answer a single question. Eventually, my dad stormed upstairs, leaving me and my mother in silence. She cried quietly, whispering, "Please, just let it go." But I couldn't. Not anymore. From that moment, my relationship with my parents changed forever. I no longer saw them as the people I could trust unconditionally. They had built my entire childhood on a lie, and I wasn't going to rest until I uncovered the truth. I dug through every possible record I could access. School yearbooks from the local elementary school, no sign of Daniel. Old medical bills hidden in the attic. A few mentions of therapy sessions for behavioral issues. And then, the biggest discovery, a caseworker's name, scrawled in the corner of one document, almost an afterthought. Caseworker, M. Hanley. I had a lead. It took me weeks to track her down. By then I was back at college, using the library computers and public records databases to piece things together. Eventually, I found an email address that seemed promising. I agonized over what to say. Finally, I wrote, "Hello, my name is Alex Carter. I believe you may have been a caseworker for my family in the 1990s. I recently discovered that I had an older brother named Daniel, and I am trying to understand what happened to him. If you are able to share anything, I would be grateful." I didn't expect a reply, but a few days later, one came. "Dear Alex, I do remember your family. I can't share everything due to confidentiality, but I will say this. Your brother did not die. He was placed into foster care due to circumstances beyond your control. If you want to know more, I suggest speaking directly to your parents. I wish you the best." My heart nearly exploded out of my chest. Confirmation Daniel was alive. That Thanksgiving, I went home armed with everything I learned. I confronted my parents again, this time more forcefully. "I know Daniel's alive," I said flatly at the dinner table. "I've talked to people. I've seen the records. I know you lost custody of him. Why the hell have you lied to me my entire life?" The air in the room grew thick. My dad's face turned red, his hands clenched into fist. My mom whispered my name like a prayer, tears welling in her eyes. Finally, my dad slammed his fist onto the table so hard the dishes rattled. "Because you don't understand," he roared. "Because we did what we had to do." I shouted back, demanding answers, demanding the truth. My mom sobbed uncontrollably. My dad yelled until his voice cracked, and the entire night dissolved into chaos. But still no answers, no clear explanation, just pain and anger and silence. That was the moment I realized I might never get the truth from them willingly. If I wanted to find Daniel, I'd have to do it myself. Back at school, I doubled down. I scoured social media, old public records, anything that might lead me to a Daniel Carter born in my state around the right year. It was like chasing a ghost, but every so often I'd find a breadcrumb, a record of a foster placement in another county, a high school yearbook photo that looked hauntingly familiar, a mugshot of a man in his 20s with the same crooked grin as the boy in the Polaroid. I was close. I could feel it. And yet with every discovery, a pit of dread grew in my stomach. Because the more I learned, the clearer it became Daniel's life hadn't been easy, and finding him might not lead to the happy reunion I was dreaming of. Finding Daniel became an obsession. I had slept and breathed the search. Every free hour between classes and work shifts went into combing through databases, messaging people, and piecing together scraps of information that might lead me to him. It was like trying to assemble a puzzle with half the pieces missing. But the pieces I did have pointed to a picture I couldn't ignore. One night, buried deep in an online records database, I found something. A foster placement record from the mid-1990s. It listed a Daniel Carter, age 6, placed with a family in a county 2 hours away. It wasn't much, but it was enough to confirm what I already suspected. My brother hadn't just vanished into thin air. He'd been shuffled into the foster system, stripped from my parents, and sent to live with strangers. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, imagining a 6-year-old boy, my brother, being dropped off at a stranger's door with a suitcase too heavy for his little hands. Did he cry? Did he ask for me? Did he even know I existed? The thought made me sick. I dug deeper. The foster placement record led me to a woman named Corinne Whitfield. She'd been listed as the guardian on one of the forms. After some digging through old phone directories and Facebook, I found her profile, older now, with gray hair and grandkids. My hands shook as I typed out a message. "Hello, Mrs. Whitfield. My name is Alex Carter. I believe you may have fostered my brother, Daniel, in the 1990s. I'm trying to learn about him. Would you be willing to talk?" I hovered over the send button for what felt like an eternity before finally clicking. And then I waited. Days passed. I checked my inbox obsessively. Finally, just when I was about to give up, a reply appeared. "Hi, Alex. Yes, I remember Daniel. He stayed with us for about a year when he was little. I don't know how much I can help, but I'd be willing to talk. Do you want to call me?" My heart nearly stopped. We set up a phone call for the next day. I sat in my dorm room, palms sweaty, staring at my phone as it rang. When she picked up, her voice was warm but cautious. "Daniel was complicated," she began. "He was a sweet boy, but he'd been through a lot. He didn't talk much at first, very withdrawn. We tried to make him feel at home, but it was hard. I swallowed hard. Did he ever mention me? His little brother? There was a pause. Then, gently, yes, he talked about you sometimes. He said he had a baby brother. He missed you. Tears stung my eyes. For the first time in my life, Daniel was more than just a shadow. He'd thought of me. He'd remembered me. Do you know what happened to him after he left your home? I asked. She sighed. He was moved around a lot. Different homes, different counties. The system wasn't kind to him. I lost track after a while. But she hesitated. The last I heard, he had some trouble as a teenager. Ran away a few times. I'm sorry, Alex. I wish I knew more. Even through the static of the call, I could hear the sadness in her voice. After talking to Mrs. Whitfield, I doubled down. I knew now that Daniel remembered me. That alone lit a fire in me I couldn't put out. And then, one night, I found something that made my blood run cold. It was a mugshot. A man in his mid-20s, scruffy, tired-looking, with dark hair and those same unmistakable eyes. The caption, Daniel J. Carter, arrested for petty theft. I stared at the screen, my stomach churning. It was him. No doubt in my mind. I didn't know whether to feel relief or heartbreak. Relief, because I'd found him. Heartbreak, because the boy I'd been searching for had grown into a man with a criminal record, beaten down by a system that had failed him. But I didn't care about the mugshot. All I cared about was that he was alive. I couldn't keep all this bottled up anymore. So I told my best friend, Mark, everything. We sat in the library, the documents and screenshots spread out between us. Mark listened quietly, then let out a low whistle. Dude, this is insane. Your parents are hiding some serious shit. Yeah, I muttered, and I'm done letting them. Mark leaned forward. So, what's the plan? You gonna track him down? I hesitated. The thought scared me. What if he didn't want to be found? What if he hated me for living the life he was denied? But deep down, I knew I couldn't stop now. I have to try, I said. Using the arrest record, I tracked down the county courthouse. From there, I found a more recent address listed in a public database. It wasn't much, just a small apartment in a rundown part of town estates away. I stared at the address on my screen for hours. My hands trembled. For years, Daniel had been nothing but a story, a ghost, a lie. And now, I had an address, a door I could knock on. But did I have the courage? Before I could make a decision, another crack appeared in my parents' facade. That Christmas, during a tense family dinner, my aunt, the same one who had once gone silent under my mother's glare, had a little too much wine. She looked at me and said softly, almost sadly, "You look so much like him now. It's uncanny." The room went still. My mother dropped her fork. My dad shot my aunt a murderous look. I leaned forward. Like who? I asked, though I already knew the answer. My aunt's eyes flicked to my parents, then back to me. She opened her mouth, but my father barked, "Don't." The silence that followed was suffocating, but the message was clear. Everyone knew. Everyone had been keeping the secret. Everyone except me. That night, lying awake in my childhood bedroom, I made a decision. I couldn't let fear hold me back anymore. I had Daniel's address. I had proof he existed, that he'd thought of me, that he was alive. And no matter what I found on the other side of that door, I had to know. I had to meet my brother. I couldn't concentrate on anything after Christmas. Not classes, not work, not friends. My mind kept drifting back to the address I had written down, the one that might finally lead me to Daniel. So, one gray Saturday morning in February, I packed a bag, told my roommate I was visiting family, and got in my car. The drive was long, 6 hours of highways and endless thoughts. My stomach churned the whole way. I kept imagining what I might find. Would Daniel slam the door in my face? Would he even recognize me? Did he want to be found at all? But no matter how many times I questioned myself, I kept driving. The address led me to a rundown neighborhood, the kind of place where the paint peeled off buildings, and stray cats darted between trash cans. The apartment complex was old, bricks crumbling, with rusty railings lining the stairwells. My heart pounded as I climbed to the second floor, each step echoing like a drumbeat. Finally, I stood in front of door to be. My hands shook so badly I could barely knock. For a long moment, nothing. I thought maybe he wasn't home. Then, slowly, the door creaked open, and there he was, Daniel. Older than the boy in the Polaroid, obviously. His face was leaner, rougher, lined with wear. Stubble covered his jaw, his dark hair a little unkempt. But his eyes, those eyes, were exactly like mine. He frowned, looking me up and down. Yeah? My throat went dry. For a second, I forgot how to speak. Then, somehow, I managed. Daniel, it's me. I'm Alex. I'm your brother. At first, he laughed. A short, disbelieving sound. Brother. I don't have a brother. But then he looked closer. His eyes narrowed. Something flickered across his face. Confusion, shock, maybe even fear. You. He whispered. Holy shit. You do look like me. I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. I've been looking for you. My whole life. They told me you were dead. But I found the truth. I had to see you. He stepped back, running a hand through his hair. For a moment, I thought he might slam the door. Instead, he muttered, Come in. The apartment was small, cluttered, but lived in. Stacks of dishes in the sink. Laundry piled in a corner. A TV murmured quietly in the background. We sat across from each other at a tiny kitchen table. The silence was unbearable. Finally, Daniel broke it. So, they told you I was dead? Yeah, I said quietly. Since I was a kid. No pictures, no stories. Just gone. He laughed bitterly. Figures. That's easier than admitting the truth. In the weeks that followed, Daniel and I kept in touch. Texted first, then calls. He was cautious, guarded, but I could feel him softening. We met up a few more times. I took him out to dinner, helped him fix his car, even invited him to visit me at school. Slowly, painfully, we began to build something that should have existed all along. It wasn't perfect. Sometimes he pulled away, disappeared for days without answering. Sometimes his bitterness boiled over. But he always came back. And I always waited. Because he was my brother. And I wasn't losing him again. Eventually, I brought Daniel home. It was tense, awkward, suffocating. My mom collapsed into tears the second she saw him, hugging him like she could squeeze 20 lost years into a single embrace. Daniel stood stiff, uncertain, but he didn't push her away. My dad, though, he just stood there, silent. Finally, Daniel looked at him and said, You ruined my life. My dad flinched. For once, he didn't yell. He just lowered his head and whispered, I know. It wasn't forgiveness, not by a long shot, but it was something. Now, months later, I sit here writing this story, trying to process everything. I found my brother. I uncovered the lies that shaped my entire childhood, and in doing so, I tore my family apart, and maybe, just maybe, started to rebuild it. Daniel and I aren't best friends. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But we're brothers. And that bond, no matter how battered, is real. Sometimes, late at night, I think about all the years we lost. The birthdays we never shared. The secrets, the lies, the pain. And I wonder, would it have been better if I'd never known? If I'd kept living in ignorance, believing my brother died young? Then I remember the way it felt to hug him for the first time. The way he looked at me, eyes wide with recognition, and said, Holy shit. You do look like me, and I know the answer. The truth broke my family, but it gave me my brother back, and I'll never regret finding him.